The straitjacket was white, pure white, the kind of white that belongs in hospitals, in morgues, in places where hope goes to die. And there I was, Harold Vincent Mercer, 75 years old, founder of Mercer Global Industries, owner of 47 properties across 12 countries, a man whose net worth exceeded $14 billion, being wheeled through the corridors of Evergreen Psychiatric Institute like a piece of damaged furniture. My own son had signed the papers. My own blood had looked me in the eyes and told the doctors I was a danger to myself, that I had lost my mind, that the great Harold Mercer had finally crumbled under the weight of his own empire. But here is what no one tells you about money. Here is what they never print in those glossy magazine profiles or whisper in the hallways of power. Money can buy you everything in the world except the one thing that matters. It cannot buy you a son who loves you. It cannot buy you time with the people who needed you when they were small and frightened and calling out your name in the darkness. I had tried everything. I had flown to Switzerland for experimental treatments. I had hired the finest neurologists in Tokyo, the most renowned psychiatrists in Vienna. I had spent millions, tens of millions, searching for answers to questions I did not even know how to ask. But none of them could fix what was broken inside my family. None of them could repair the fracture that had started 40 years ago when I chose boardrooms over bedtime stories, when I chose acquisitions over affection. The gurney squeaked beneath me. The fluorescent lights above passed like the markers of a road I could not escape. And somewhere in the recesses of my medicated mind, I understood that this was not about my sanity at all. This was about the inheritance. This was about $37 billion that my son, Richard, had been circling like a vulture for the past decade. This was about the will I had rewritten 6 months ago, the one that had reduced his share significantly after I discovered certain irregularities in the company accounts. This was about revenge dressed up as concern, greed wearing the mask of compassion. 2 nurses pushed my gurney. One was a large man with thick arms and an expressionless face, the kind of person who had learned to detach himself from the suffering he witnessed daily. The other was different. She was younger, perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that held something I had not seen in a very long time. Kindness. Her name was Elena. I would learn this later, but in that moment, all I knew was that she looked at me, not through me, not past me, not at the chart attached to my bed. She looked at me like I was still human, like I still mattered. The Evergreen Psychiatric Institute was not a place for ordinary people. It was a private facility, discreet, expensive, the kind of establishment where wealthy families sent their embarrassments. The walls were painted in soft, inoffensive colors. The art was abstract and meaningless. Everything was designed to soothe, to pacify, to make you forget that you had been locked away from the world you had built. My room had a window that looked out onto manicured gardens. There were flowers arranged in a vase on the nightstand. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the bathroom stocked with luxury toiletries. It was a prison dressed in silk. On the first night, I lay in the darkness and tried to remember the last time I had told Richard that I loved him. I searched through decades of memories, through business dinners and graduation ceremonies, through holidays spent in different time zones, through birthdays celebrated with expensive gifts delivered by assistants, because I could not be there myself. I could not remember ever saying those words to my son. And in that silence, in that terrible emptiness, I began to understand why he hated me. I began to see the shape of his wound, the outline of the father-shaped hole that I had carved into his heart by being perpetually absent, perpetually distracted, perpetually reaching for the next deal while he reached for me. But understanding did not make this right. Understanding did not justify what he had done, because something was wrong with me, something physical, something real, and no one wanted to see it. For the past 8 months, I had been experiencing episodes. Moments where my vision blurred, where my left hand trembled uncontrollably, where words escaped me mid-sentence. I had told my personal physician, I had told Richard, I had begged them to investigate, to run more tests, to look deeper. They had dismissed me. They had called it stress. They had called it age. And then when I persisted, when I demanded answers, they had called it paranoia. Richard had been there when Dr. Morrison declared me mentally unfit. Richard had nodded solemnly, had expressed his deep concern for his father's well-being, had signed the commitment papers with a hand that did not shake even once. He had performed the role of devoted son so perfectly that I almost believed him myself. Almost. But I had seen something in his eyes, a flicker of triumph, a flash of hunger, the look of a man who had finally won a game he had been playing for years. The days at Evergreen blurred together. They gave me pills that made everything soft around the edges. They conducted evaluations where I was asked to count backward from 100, to identify shapes, to describe my feelings about my childhood. I answered everything correctly. I demonstrated clarity, coherence, competence. It did not matter. The diagnosis had already been written. The narrative had already been decided. Harold Mercer was suffering from age-related cognitive decline complicated by paranoid delusions. Harold Mercer needed to remain under observation indefinitely. Harold Mercer was no longer capable of managing his own affairs, and so Richard had been appointed as my temporary conservator. Richard now controlled my assets, my properties, my company. Richard had everything he had ever wanted. Elena was the only light in that darkness. She was not supposed to spend extra time with patients. She was not supposed to sit beside my bed and listen when I told her about the episodes, about the tremors, about the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong inside my body. She was not supposed to believe me, but she did. She believed me because she paid attention. She watched. She noticed the way my hand shook during our conversations, the way I sometimes paused mid-word as if searching for something lost. She saw what the doctors had chosen not to see, what Richard had paid them not to see. One evening, she came to my room after her shift had ended. She sat in the chair beside my bed and she told me her story. She had grown up poor. Her father had worked in a factory until an accident took his ability to walk. Her mother had cleaned houses, had worked double shifts, had sacrificed everything so that Eleanor could go to nursing school. They had taught her that every person had dignity, that every life had value, that wealth and status meant nothing compared to the content of someone's character. She told me about her faith, about the small church she attended on Sundays, about the prayers she whispered before sleep, about her belief that God placed people in each other's paths for reasons they might never fully understand. She told me that she believed I was telling the truth. And then she told me something that changed everything. There was another doctor, a neurologist named Dr. Catherine Shaw, who had been brought in 3 months ago to consult on a different patient. Elena had overheard conversations. She had seen documents she was not supposed to see. Dr. Shaw had requested a full neurological workup for me, including advanced imaging that could detect conditions the standard tests might miss. The request had been denied. It had been denied by Dr. Morrison, the physician in charge of my care. It had been denied after a phone call from Richard Mercer. My son had blocked the very tests that might have proven my sanity. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of betrayal settle into my bones. I had failed Richard as a father. I had been absent, neglectful, consumed by ambition, but I had never tried to destroy him. I had never tried to steal his freedom, his autonomy, his very identity. He was not seeking justice. He was seeking annihilation. The next morning, I made a decision. I would escape, not physically, not yet, but I would fight. I would use every resource I had accumulated over 7 decades of life, every relationship I had built, every favor I was owed. I would prove what was happening to me, and I would expose what Richard had done, but I could not do it alone. I asked Elena if she would help me. I knew what I was asking. I knew the risk she would be taking. She could lose her job, her career, her reputation. She could be accused of conspiracy, of exploitation, of taking advantage of a mentally unstable patient. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Mr. Mercer, I have spent my whole life watching powerful people ignore those who cannot fight back. I have watched families abandon their elderly. I have watched systems fail the vulnerable. I became a nurse because I wanted to help. But sometimes helping means more than administering medication and checking vital signs. Sometimes helping means standing up. Sometimes it means taking a risk. She paused, and her eyes filled with tears. My father spent the last 3 years of his life in a facility not so different from this one. He tried to tell us something was wrong. He tried to tell us he was sick, really sick, not just confused. We did not listen. The doctors did not listen. And by the time we finally ran the right tests, it was too late. The cancer had spread everywhere. He died 6 weeks later. She took my hand. I will not let that happen again. I will help you. And so we began. Elena smuggled in a burner phone. I made careful, coded calls to an old friend, a retired federal judge named Thomas Hartley, who owed me his career after I had funded his initial campaign 30 years ago. I contacted my personal attorney, Margaret Chen, who had been stonewalled by Richard every time she tried to visit me. Slowly, carefully, we built a case. But Richard was not idle. He sensed something shifting. He visited more frequently, watching me with suspicious eyes, questioning the staff about my behavior, about any unusual activities. One afternoon, he came to my room and sat across from me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Father," he said, "I want you to know that I am doing all of this for your own good. The doctors say you are making progress. If you continue to cooperate, perhaps we can discuss transitioning you to a more comfortable arrangement." I looked at him. I looked at this man I had created, this stranger wearing my blood, and I felt something I had not expected. I felt sorry for him, because I understood now. I understood the emptiness that drove him. I understood the hollow space inside where a father's love should have been. I understood that his greed was not really about money at all. It was about filling a void that could never be filled, about proving his worth to a man who had never bothered to see it. I had made him this way, not entirely, not completely. He had made his own choices. But I had planted the seeds of his destruction with every absence, every dismissal, every moment I chose empire over embrace. "Richard," I said, "when you were 7 years old, you made me a card for Father's Day. You drew a picture of us fishing together, even though we had never been fishing. You wrote that you wanted to catch the biggest fish in the world and give it to me. Do you remember that?" His smile faltered. "You kept asking me when we would go. You asked every weekend for an entire summer, and I always said next time, next time, next time, until you stopped asking altogether." He stood abruptly. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Father, but it won't work. The doctors have evaluated you. The courts have ruled. You are exactly where you need to be." He left without another word. That night, Eleanor told me that Dr. Shaw had agreed to see me. It had taken weeks of careful maneuvering, but the neurologist had been convinced to perform an independent evaluation. She would come to Evergreen under the guise of consulting on another patient. She would examine me in secret. The examination happened 3 days later, in a storage room on the facility's basement level. Dr. Shaw was a small woman with grey hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She conducted a series of tests, had me perform movements, checked my reflexes, shone lights in my eyes. When she finished, she was quiet for a very long time. "Mr. Mercer," she finally said, "I need to order imaging, an MRI, possibly a PET scan. But based on what I am seeing, I believe you may have a slow-growing tumor affecting your motor cortex. It would explain the tremors, the word-finding difficulties, the episodes you have described." She paused. "It is also highly treatable if caught in time." I closed my eyes. For months I had been telling them something was wrong. For months they had called me paranoid, delusional, incompetent. And all along there had been something real, something physical, something that a simple scan could have revealed. My son had nearly killed me to get his inheritance faster. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Judge Hartley filed an emergency motion. Margaret Chen presented evidence of the blocked medical requests, of the suspicious timing of my commitment, of the financial irregularities that Richard had been desperately trying to conceal. The court ordered an independent medical evaluation. The MRI revealed a tumor the size of a golf ball pressing against my brain. It was benign, operable, entirely treatable, but it had been growing for over a year, causing symptoms that had been dismissed, ignored, deliberately overlooked. Richard was arrested on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. I watched them lead him away in handcuffs, and I felt something break inside me. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just an overwhelming, crushing sadness for all the years we had lost, for all the damage we had done to each other, for the father and son we might have been if I had made different choices. The surgery was successful. Dr. Shaw removed the tumor completely. Within weeks, the tremors stopped. The fog lifted. I was myself again, perhaps more myself than I had been in years, but I could not stop thinking about Richard. He was facing serious prison time. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own attorneys were advising him to plead guilty and hope for leniency. I visited him in jail 1 month after my release from Evergreen. He looked smaller than I remembered. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The arrogance had faded, leaving behind something raw and wounded. He would not look at me. "Richard," I said, "I am going to drop the charges." His head snapped up. "What?" "I am going to drop the charges. All of them. You will not go to prison." He stared at me like I had lost my mind again. "Why would you do that? After everything I did to you?" I took a breath. "Because I finally understand that I did something to you first. I abandoned you, Richard. Not physically, perhaps, but in every way that mattered. I was so busy building an empire that I forgot to build a family. I was so focused on leaving you wealth that I forgot to leave you love." My voice cracked. "You grew up in mansions that were really just beautiful prisons. You had everything money could buy, except the one thing you actually needed. And when you became an adult, you did not know how to fill that emptiness. So you reached for the only thing I ever showed you mattered. Money, power, control." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I am not excusing what you did. What you did was wrong. It was cruel. It could have killed me, but I am choosing to believe that it came from a wound, not from evil. I'm choosing to believe that you are still my son, somewhere beneath all that pain." "Dad," he whispered, using a word he had not spoken in decades. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I reached through the bars and took his hand. "I know. I am sorry too. I am sorry it took me 75 years to see what I should have seen all along. I am sorry I made you believe that you were not enough. I am sorry I made you think that love was something you had to earn, instead of something you deserved just for being born." We sat there, father and son, crying together in a jail visitation room, finally breaking down walls that had been building for a lifetime. I dropped the charges. Richard entered a rehabilitation program. He started therapy, started confronting the demons he had been running from his entire life. And I changed too. I sold most of my businesses. I donated billions to causes that mattered, to organizations that helped families, that supported mental health, that provided care for the elderly who had been abandoned by the people who should have loved them. I kept one house, just one, a small cottage by a lake where the water was clear and the fish were plentiful. Richard and I went fishing there for the first time last summer. We did not catch much. We did not need to. We just sat in that boat, two broken men learning how to heal, talking about nothing and everything, finally becoming the father and son we should have been all along. Elena was there when we got back to shore. She had become family by then, the daughter I never had, the angel who had seen me when everyone else had looked away. "How was it?" she asked. Richard held up a tiny fish, barely bigger than his hand. "We caught the biggest fish in the world," he said, and he smiled. A real smile. The smile of a 7-year-old boy who had finally gotten his wish. I think about that journey often. I think about how close I came to dying in that institution, alone and discredited, betrayed by the person who should have loved me most. I think about how money and power meant nothing in those moments, how all my billions could not buy me freedom or truth or the chance to make things right. And I think about Elena. I think about a young nurse who saw a wealthy old man not as a patient or a problem or a paycheck, but as a human being deserving of dignity and truth. I think about how she risked everything to help a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. Miracles do not always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a kind word, a believing heart, a hand that reaches out when everyone else has turned away. Sometimes the people with the least power change the world more than those with the most. My name is Harold Vincent Mercer. I am 76 years old now. I have more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes, but I have finally learned what truly matters. Love cannot be bought. It can only be given. Trust cannot be purchased. It can only be earned. And redemption, true redemption, is available to everyone, no matter how far they have fallen, no matter how much damage they have done. You just have to be willing to see, to really see, to look beyond the surface, beyond the symptoms, beyond the easy explanations, because the truth is always there, waiting to be found. And sometimes finding it requires nothing more than one person willing to believe, one person willing to fight, one person willing to love, and that, in the end, is the only wealth that matters.